Hi everyone, this is Eliza, and today we are talking about the subject of self-injury or self-harm. And the NIH did a study, and they basically showed that children between the ages of 7 and 16 reported that 50% of those children had engaged in self-harm, with the youngest age, or not the youngest, the average age being at about 12 years old when people started to engage in self-injury. And well, certainly adolescents are certainly the more prone to this type of behavior. It is not only them. In fact, men and women engage in self-harm. They just don't report as much, so it's a little bit harder to get the statistics on that. But in light of that, there's a really good chance that you or somebody you know, and especially a child that you know, has engaged in self-injury in some way. And so this is a really important thing to talk about. But before we go any further, I want to give you a definition. And this definition is by Dr. Mark Mayfield, who has written a book called Help My Teen is Self-Injuring. And I'm going to link to it because it is a free download and it's very helpful. But he gives this definition. He says this, and I'm going to read it. Self-injury is a deliberate and intentional, self-induced, non-lethal act of bodily harm, which is done to reduce, avoid, and or communicate mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual distress. And I think that sums it up really well. Very helpful definition. So with that definition laid, I want to add a little bit more to what self-injury does, or what it is and what it does. Really, it is something that a person uses to control their pain or reduce their pain or relieve their symptom of emotional distress. And it gives a release from the distress that they are feeling, whether that distress is internal or even external. And it, like I said, it actually does give a release because of what happens in the brain during when somebody self-injures. Endorphins are released, and there is a euphoric sense that somebody will experience, and it kind of distracts them from the pain that they are or the distress that they're feeling. So, but with that said, it's often brief. And because of that, there's a lot of disappointment that comes with self-injury. And it's not disappointment just because the relief was so brief. It's disappointment as it pertains to shame, that they have once again fallen into this pattern, this self-injury. And so it's disappointment that they feel in themselves. So important to kind of understand that when we're talking about this. But one of the things I want to say, though, is that there is a difference that we want to distinguish between self-injury and a person who is suicidal. People who self-injure are not in the same category, and that is because of the motive behind that. As scary as it is to hear about somebody who is, that you love, that is self-injuring or self-harming, it is usually not about them desiring to set out to die. Now, I will say this, that people who self-injure do have a higher risk of future suicidal ideation. So we want to keep that in mind. But most of the time, people who self-injure are not motivated with a desire to die. The reason why they do it is actually multifaceted, and it is it's common for people who are self-injuring to really, their motivation being that they just don't feel listened to, heard, or even seen. Or it could be that they have needs that for whatever reason just aren't being met, and they are responding to those with the various stressors that move them towards thinking that that's a way to deal with it. So it can also be caused by external things like bullying or just external situations that you're exposed to or that you're in that are causing emotional distress, and you just don't know how to process those emotions or those thoughts about the situation. Other times, though, and this is kind of unique to self-injury, is that sometimes it's because the person is struggling to feel anything. Like they feel emotionally numb and they just want to feel something, and so they cut, thinking that at least they're feeling something. So that can be one reason. With younger children, it can be a means of punishing themselves when they feel like they have disappointed somebody, or they're not measuring up to certain standards, or they've made mistakes. They will self-injure as a way of punishment because they don't know how to process through that well. So I'll talk a little bit more about what we can do to help, but I do want to also say that a misconception can be that people who self-injure are attention seeking. And that is just not the case. In fact, most of the time, people who are self-injuring want to hide the fact that it's happening to them or that they are engaging in it. So just important to know. So what can we do to help? Well, this is where we want to make sure that we are listening well. We want to walk with somebody and listen well, but before we get there, we want to make sure that they are safe. So definitely assess. Simply ask the person if they have a desire or if they have thoughts about ending their life. And if you feel like they are in that category, then getting emergency help is necessary if somebody is at risk of taking their own life. And I did a video a while back on suicide that you can watch if you're concerned if maybe somebody is suicidal, how to deal with that. But certainly it is a responsible thing to do to get emergency help by calling 911 if somebody's life is in danger. But once you've done that, as I mentioned before, we want to listen well to people who are struggling with self-injury. And listening has been proven to be very helpful for people, which is why counseling helps so much for people who are struggling with this. But we can listen, even if you're not a counselor, we can listen, and we want to listen non-judgmentally. We want to listen for all that they're going through. We want to listen simply so that they feel heard, not that they feel like we're going to try to fix them or solve their problems. Which leads me to something else that we can do to help. Simply stay calm and deal with your own emotions. It can certainly be very upsetting to find out that somebody is self-injuring, and we want to stay calm rather than adding more confusion and shock to the situation. It's normal to be upset, like I said, but we want to make sure that we're attending to our own emotional distress rather than reacting to theirs. And in light of that, then once we're in that place, then we can lean in and ask good questions and listen. And Dr. Mayfield in his book talks about some questions. He says, ask this. He says, if your scars could talk, what would they say? Or what situations are you dealing with right now that you're having a hard time communicating? Like, what emotions are you dealing with that you just don't feel like you can communicate right now? So just listen to them, ask good questions, and most importantly, point them to hope. We want to point them to hope that people have. People who self-injure have a very low view of themselves, and it is simply contrary to what the Bible says about them. So remind them that they are loved, that they are worthy, that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that God has a plan for them, and that God is for them. Point them to the truth of the gospel, which covers everything that they've done, what mistakes they've made, and the shame and the guilt that they have for even engaging in self-injury. Point them to the gospel. It is sufficient for those things. And then I would just say, pray for them. And ask if you could pray for them right then, and let them hear your prayers to God for their healing, for their comfort, for their care. Self-injury can be very scary, and it's a subject that we can be confused about. But there's a lot that you can do to help, as I just mentioned. And I hope that this has given you some direction on this very important subject.